Hello again and welcome back. We are done with general awareness. Woo! Now we get to go on to more of the things that we are working with on a day-to-day basis. And that brings up the hazardous material table and the dangerous goods list. So if you are very observant, you will see on your presentation down on the bottom, this screen shows general awareness in video 2. I found that mistake when I went back on here and didn't think it was worth sending the whole thing back because the other slides are marked correctly on this video. So we're going to talk now about the actual hazardous material table, which is the name that's given to it in the 49 CFR, the DOT regulations for domestic, and the dangerous goods list, the name that it is given in the IMDG or the ocean regulations. And what this section we're going to do is really just go through these tables column by column to see what is there and what we need to deal with. And if you're new to hazardous materials, these tables can be a little bit intimidating when you first look at them because it has a lot of information. And just like everything else in the regulation, there's a lot of information we as a forwarder or broker will never use. But it's there, it's for reference for us, but your customers are using these. So on all these slides, if you see up on the top here, these are the headers for the hazardous material table that's in the 49 CFR. And these are the headers for the IMDG. As you can see, there are a lot more columns in the IMDG. They go into a little bit more detail on some things, which are kind of pretty cool on some things. But as you can see, 172.101, that's where you're going to find the hazardous material table. See this down here on the bottom, this little link here? This is the actual table online. So if you're more of an online person that to look things up, like to use that Control F to find something that you're looking for, that's where the actual section 172.101 is. It begins with a lot of the definitions and explanations of what the different columns are, and then it goes to the actual table. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I like to use a book more often, but it is out there at all times. I have used this at times when I am either on the road or on vacation and I get a call and I have to look something up to give somebody some advice on something. So it's kind of good to have this out there, to know it's out there. All you got to do is Google 49 CFR hazardous material table or just hazardous material table, and it will probably come out. So unfortunately, the IMDG is a very protected publication by the International Maritime Organization, and they get a lot of money for this book. Those books cost over around $350 to $400 every 2 years. The DOT's 49 CFR ranges from $50 to $70 depending on what you're doing. So IMO makes a lot of money selling these books. It is not available out there on the internet. They keep a very close eye on it. So it's hard to search for IMDG regulations online. You have to have the book. So we're going to go through all these columns, and in here I've got a listing of the columns. Some of them match, some of them don't, of course. It's just the way it is. The 49 CFR was written before the IMDG, and we do things better, so we don't like to change things after we do them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the columns one at a time and let you know what it is, either specifically what you need to know about it. And on some of these, when it comes to actually what you need on a shipping paper, I'm going to cover that under the 5th video on shipping papers. So if you think I'm skirting through something quickly on, say, a proper shipping name or ID number, we'll get back to it in another section. IMDG, like I said, it just has some different things in it. And I'm just going to explain what these are and when we as a forwarder or broker would use them. So off we go. So we're going to start, and I'm going to go more of the direction of the IMDG here on just the numbering of it. It was just easier because they have 17 of them. Here's an example of where they don't match. Identification numbers, which we all call UN numbers. Officially, they're identification numbers, but calling them a UN number is certainly fine. They're found up here in column 4. Of the 49 CFR, column 1 of the IMDG. So I like IMDG better as far because it's in the exact order that you have to put it on your shipping papers. So it makes more sense because the ID number used to come in a different order, and when it was changed, the US 49 CFR never changed the order in the book. The big differences on this table, though, are the 49 CFR lists all the hazardous materials in alphabetical order, and the IMDG lists them in numeric order, but both of them for the UN number. But both of them has cross-reference directories before the table that you can go into. So if you know one, if you know the proper shipping name and don't know the UN number for some reason, you can go look it up and find what it is so that you can cross-reference. So the identification number, they're standardized numbers. It's a 4-digit number. There are about 3,600 ID numbers, and I'm going to call them UN numbers. I just do. There's about 3,600 out there, so it's a lot of hazardous materials that are out there. This is critical to emergency responders. If you get the UN number wrong, everything else is wrong. So it's really important to make sure that you don't transpose any numbers and it all matches, of course. Always must be correct and legible. So that's where, documents should be, your shipping papers should be typed. They shouldn't be written. So you have to be able to see those. If you're scanning something and you're sending it, take a look and open up that scanned document before you forward it on, because sometimes scans don't come out very clearly, and it's kind of useless if you send it if it's not totally legible. UN, if you didn't know, stands for United Nations. It can be used for international and domestic shipment. So universal number all around the world, UN numbers. Those do not change. Very nice. There are a few in the 49 CFR of hazardous materials that are considered NA numbers. And and NA stands for North American, and they can only be used for USA and Canada shipments. Now, when Mexico was no longer part of the USA, the North America, I don't know, but they're not included. The reason for that is USA and Canada have some of the strictest regulations in the world, and they pretty much comply word for word with each other. So the NA numbers can be used for shipments in USA and Canada. These are materials that really aren't used internationally. We're not exporting some of these things. Something like asbestos that has been used or whatever, and it's probably going somewhere as a waste product. Well, we're not shipping that out to other countries. It's possible there's a place up in Canada, I doubt it, but those are for transportation just usually within the United States. Like I said, there are very few of those. Very seldom are you going to run across those. Next is the proper shipping name. And proper shipping names, if you look at this page, you're like, whoa, that has like a lot of rules to it. But it's not. It just is kind of clarification in that we'll go through these. When you're looking at the hazardous material table or the IMDG, it's only the words in Roman type. So they're not italicized. Any words that are italicized is not actually part of the proper shipping names. So that's important to know, of knowing exactly what you need to put on the paper, on your shipping papers, because sometimes in the proper shipping name column, it goes into a little more detail about the products. And I will talk about that as an example. So if you see the word or in there in italics, but both of the words are in Roman type, either proper shipping name can be used. And those are, some of that used to be things like the interchangeable words of toxic and poison, and more familiar words out there that are more commercially understandable. Some of those are allowed, and you'll see two names in there. Basically, it's whatever name your customer gives you and is on their dangerous goods declaration, that is on their safety data sheet. That's what you want to use. You want to be consistent. Creativity is not a good thing in doing shipping papers for hazardous material. I'm a pretty creative guy, but I'm an export guy also. And so I tell people, if you're from the export side, dealing with hazardous material and shipping papers, it's a lot like a letter of credit. You go letter per letter. You don't add anything. You don't leave anything off. It's just one way you have to do it. Don't get creative. Just put it out there and do it that way. Qualifying words may or may not be used in the shipping name. So example, if you've got ammunition smoke, white phosphorus with burster, expelling charge, or propelling charge, your customer may want to describe it as ammunition smoke, white phosphorus with expelling charge. It has one of those. They may produce different ones. They're all under the same classification, but he may want to put that as a qualifying word so that if there is an incident, he'll know exactly what product they're talking about. And it might be just a little bit different way if it's a burster or an expelling charge or propelling charge of how you would handle something like that. So again, you follow the directions. You don't, if your customer sends you something, ammunition smoke, white phosphorus, and that's all he puts, then that's what you put. If he decides to put with burster, that's what you put. So the word C is used in the hazardous material table when the two PSNs in Roman type. If there's no additional information in any of the other hazardous material tables, you've got to refer to the other one, like accumulators, electric. Well, you can use that, but then it says C batteries, and then you go to batteries, and that's where you find all the information for your hazardous description, like the UN, UN number, the packing group, things like that. So again, these are kind of rare situations. Either PSN can be used if both are in Roman type, like if it says acid, sludge, see sludge acid. And that is just a little bit of the terminology, or what people call things on an official name, have kind of evolved over the years, that they've got two names and they'll accept both of them. You have concentration ranges sometimes. I kind of mentioned this a little bit with hydrogen peroxide is an example. I'm not sure if it falls exactly under this, but hydrogen peroxide that's 3% hydrogen peroxide is not going to be hazardous. But perhaps if it's 20%, it could be hazardous, but it could be even more hazardous if it's 50% or more, or say 80% or more. And what that does, and when you see those concentration ranges listed, if it's between this and this, it's going to tell you what packing group. So it's going to help you, the shipper, determine what kind of packaging it needs. And we'll talk about packaging, but kind of keep that in mind. So if you have that, you can put the percentage range in there, but you don't have to. It's whether your customer wants to or not. One of our jobs, I believe, is on the shipping paper. If we're looking at something and they show acidic acid solution, say packing group 2, and it says not less than 50%, but not more than 80%, and your customer has on there 85%, well, we should catch that. I think. But that's one of those things that you want to look and go, you know, should this be a packing group 1 instead of a packing group 2? It looks like it falls under, and it's like, oh my gosh, they typed 85. It really was 65, but the smudge on the 6 came over, and it looks like an 85 on your documents or whatever. So just something that, you know, that's what our job is now. I feel like we're checkers for our customers. So the mono prefix may or not be used as part of the proper shipping name. Things like but numbers and things like that are in the that is part of the proper shipping name. So like I said, whatever your customer has on their document, that's what you put on the shipping papers. Liquid or solid must be noted if it's part of the proper shipping name. So you can't just put corrosive. It has to be corrosive liquid or corrosive solid if it's part of the proper shipping name. So again, if you just follow what the proper shipping name is, don't get creative. You just put it as it is. Hazardous waste. If waste is not in the proper shipping name, the word waste must immediately precede the proper shipping name. So if it is waste of a product that has already been used, but there are specific line items for some items of waste that have different classifications. So just that's one of those words that, like I said, if you're dealing with waste, you probably know this. If you're dealing with waste and haven't been trained, that's bad. So it's something you follow your customers' guidelines. Abbreviations that you'll see, they've got all these in there, the NOI and the NOBN, whatever, NOIBN, those aren't used anymore. NOS, we all know what that means, but you can use NOS, N period, O period, S period, capital letter, small letter, whatever. All forms are acceptable and interchangeable. Like I tell people, just be consistent. If you show it as the product is NOS on one part of the document and show it as N period, O period, S period on the other part of the document, it's just not consistent. And those are the things that drive me crazy, but I guess DOT would probably be fine with it, but I wouldn't. So hazard class. Oh my God, this is great. We get to skip over the screen because we just kind of covered it. But in this column, as you can see, and just to back up to show you, the proper shipping name is column 2 on both of them. And I list it right here of what it is to point that out. So, so this is ones that actually match. Your class, also columns that match in both tables. Column 3, they're the same. We went through all of these. The class is actually the 1.1. It's not a class 1. It's not a class 4. It's got to be a 4.1 or a 4.2 or 4.3 on your shipping papers, and that's where this is indicated. So, and that's enough. Now, the other thing you might see under the class column is the word forbidden. And the question is, well, how can something that's forbidden and can't be transported, how does it get to where it needs to go? It doesn't just sit there for the rest of its life. The idea behind the word forbidden, those are commodities that need a special permit. So they can't be offered for transportation without a special permit from the Department of Transportation. And believe me, any of your customers that are shipping something that's forbidden, they are going to let you know what the special permit is so that you can put that on your documents. So again, you don't run into those so often. Your packing group. Now, the packing group is, for a long time I thought, okay, what is the big deal on this whole packing group thing? But be honest, the packing group to me is a very important thing to take notice of because it tells you what the relative degree of danger is for that product. Packing group 1, that's the greatest level of danger. Remember I told you that you should be a little more conscious when it's a class 1, a little more conscious when it's a 2.3, a 6.2 infectious substances, radioactive, you know, the more hazardous things. Well, under each class, there are different levels that they put them in, 1, 2, or 3. So if it's packing group 1, it's the most flammable. It's the most corrosive. So it needs the best packaging out there to keep it from something happening to it in case there is an incident. So packing group 1, greatest level of danger. Packing group 2 is a medium level of danger. That's where you're going to probably find 60% of your products are in packing group 3. Or the next one, packing group 3, is a minor level of danger. Still hazardous though. So you don't see packing group 1 a lot, but that is one that I tell my employees. You see packing group 1, you better have somebody checking your documents. I mean, we like someone to always check our documents for hazardous before they go out of the office, but packing group 1 especially. Like I said, it determines the packaging requirements. There's a lot of testing that goes on in these type of packagings. A fiberboard box, they have drop tests and they do them from different levels. And, they have to drop it on each corner, on each side, verify that it only has a certain amount of scuffing or denting allowed or whatever. There's vibration tests. There's a lot of tests out there that and we'll talk about those a little bit on the packaging video. Not really important for what we're doing, but just to know that there's different types. I've got pictures of a fiberboard box below. And if you notice that I spell the word fiberboard the European way, R-E, I tried to get in the habit of doing that because that is officially how it is in the IMDG. And they sometimes get a little bit touchy, especially the French. But the US DOT, they will accept that. Their spelling it is the American way of the ER in fiber. So either one's fine. I just get used to it because I'm more of an ocean freight guy. So if you look at the boxes below, you see the first one on the left is a more stringent packaging that you have with dividers inside, thicker, reinforced, could have reinforcements on the corners on the inside, different things. They could have sleeves on the inside that they're packaged in. That's probably a packing group 1. A packing group 2 has usually an inner container and divided. So, and then packing group 3 could be a simple fiberboard box. Now, I just use these as examples. That doesn't mean for all the commodities of packing group 1, this will fit or whatever. There are very specific packaging requirements for every single class, every single packing group. That is a big portion of both sets of regulations on the packaging. So that's when I mentioned packaging seems like it's simple, that it's nice and secure, put a couple layers of bubble wrap in it, put some peanuts in it, I'm safe and good to go. No, that is not packaging for hazardous material. You have to go very specific by that. Our customers spend a lot of money that do a lot of hazardous on trying to get the best and most economical packaging they can. When you're shipping millions of these boxes, a difference of a small amount of being able to remove some cardboard or whatever reduces your weight. It has less cost of the packaging. A box like this might cost you $1 or $2 at a store. Something like this might cost $3 or $4, and something like this might cost $10. Well, when you're shipping millions of these a year, selecting which one, you can use this packing group 1 for any of them. You can use packing group 1 packaging for packing group 2 or packing group 3. If you want more stringent, that's okay. But just saying, your customers are out there and they've got people that, like I said, have those packaging degrees, and they are out there trying to find ways to save a penny on every package every single day, because it adds up. They don't want to put more labels on than they need to. They don't want to put more markings on than they need to, because all those things cost money. Not a lot, but they cost money. So they're always looking for ways to reduce their costs. So you got to be a little bit careful of just making sure with these smaller guys that they understand the right type of packaging if you don't have someone experienced shipping hazardous. Packing group 1, 2, or 3, even though they are called, those are indicated by the capital I or the Roman numerals. You can't put PG3 on there. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. It tells anybody with DOT, IMDG, any carrier that you don't know what you're doing. So do not do that. Be honest, in a long time, I haven't seen anybody do that in a long time. But you can write it as just a simple capital I as a packing group 1, or you can put a PG1. Either one's fine. The PG should be in capital letters. It's just a little more clear. There could be a space between the G and the 1 or the capital I. Those are small little details, but you just be consistent with how you do it. That's, to me, that's the important thing. Determining a packing group of flammable liquids, you kind of wonder, okay, how do they determine? It's all determined by the flash point. So it just depends on where that flash point is, on whether it's going to be a 1, 2, or 3. And these are in Celsius. They go up to in Fahrenheit. You can show your flash point in Celsius or Fahrenheit. Both are fine. We use Celsius. It's just more the international. And Celsius doesn't, you know, I won't tell you our own company story of why we do it, but that will help you determine and understand why something's there. Label codes, these are in column 6 of the hazardous material table. They're called subsidiary risk in the dangerous goods list. Remember when we talked about precedents, when we had mixtures of 2 chemicals or commodities together, and you determine, okay, when I mix a 3 and an 8, does it become a 8 or does it become a 3? And this, when if it becomes an 8, it's going to have a subsidiary risk of an 8. So you're going to have both of them. They're still corrosive. They're still flammable, but one's primary, one's a subsidiary or secondary. And in the U.S., we call them label codes, which it means that's these labels that need to go on your packages. So pretty much the same thing there. The label codes, they indicate the required labels that must be applied to each package. You know, one commodity, I've seen up to 4, a mixture of 4 different classes in a final product that had 3 label code, 4 label codes totally with the primary class included. Very, very rare again, but there's a good amount in mixtures or solutions out there that you're going to have 2 of them. It indicates the subsidiary hazard, it is material other than the primary hazard, like we talked about on that precedence table. Very useful to know that when you're doing your shipping papers, is something there, that, it's going to have to go in parentheses after the hazard class. We'll talk about that when we get to shipping papers. And like I said, multiple label codes apply to mixtures and solutions. Subsidiary risks, again, same as the label codes pretty much, but if it's a mixture of materials. But also in this column, if there's a P in this column, it indicates that it's a marine pollutant. Well, kind of handy, because on the 49 CFR, we have to go look up on a separate table whether or not something is a marine pollutant. Again, get to that in shipping papers. But in the IMDG, it has a P there, so it's pretty helpful. I don't have to look it up in a whole nother table. It's already in the in this table, so on the list. So that's where this does come in handy. That's kind of nice. Next, we have something called special provisions. And basically what special provisions are is they give a little bit of guideline, or they give specific guideline on certain things that must be done or certain things that you may not have to do under certain circumstances. This is something that we really don't get involved with. This is where, when they're talking about what kind of packaging they use, what kind of modes of transportation they can use, things like that. So this is the responsibility of the shipper to determine and read these special provisions. There can be a lot. Well, when you're looking at some examples, I'll refer to this again and kind of show what they are. But in the hazardous material label, and hazardous material table and the dangerous goods list, the special provisions do not match. So if something has a special provision of 1 under the HMT or an A1, it does not mean the same thing as a 1 under the dangerous goods list. They do not correspond to each other at all. So nothing matches whatsoever. On the DOT list, there's a lot of them that start with numbers. But then if some of the special provisions only apply to when it's shipped by air or highway, rail, or water, those letters A, H, R, and W precedes the number. So you're going to have a list in the special provisions of, say, 300 different special provisions. And remember, these cover every single hazardous commodity in there. So of course there's quite a few of them. It's not meaning that you have to go read them all. You may, some have no special provisions, some have maybe 2 or 3 special provisions, and I will read those. Some of them have 10 special provisions that you go, something like lithium ion batteries. And that's where your customer's really looking for, okay, how can I ship this the most economical way? How do I get away with not doing all the things you normally have to do for shipping lithium batteries? And that's perfectly fine if they can find it in special provisions. So just the letters in front of the A, H, R, and W, it only applies when they're shipped on that mode of transportation. And then when you're talking about transported in B, which is bulk packaging, those are really large packages. Non-bulk packaging, those are your everyday standard cartons, drums, things like that, is non-bulk packaging. Only applies when they're shipped that way. Then you've got an intermodal portable tank, and then a portable tank. Those are your IBC units, those are your ISA tanks, things like that. They may have some very special provisions in there for that commodity, which that's something your customer, again, is looking up, because it really deals with more of the packaging and whether or not it has to be declared as hazardous or dangerous or not. So again, you may have a customer says that, this product is not hazardous. And you're like, well, I know it is. I've shipped this before for another company. I know it's a proper shipping name. And there's nothing wrong with you questioning your customer on that, which you should. But before you question him, you might want to read the special provisions and look it up and go, oh, it says here, if you're doing this specific type of commodity and packaging less than 4 pounds per package or whatever, it does not have to be labeled or marked or shipped under these regulations. And then you look at his packing list and you're like, they're all 3-pound boxes. So you're perfectly fine. Even though it's a total shipment of 40,000 pounds, it could be the individual box. So kind of look at that. That's something that I would look at, but that's something like in my company, they would escalate that to me and say, okay, this guy is shipping this. It's on the list, but he's telling me it's not hazardous. And that's where I would say, okay, let me look it up. Let me take a look at it and go, I think this is where he's coming from. I would send probably a courtesy email to the customer and say, I'm our hazmat compliance guy or whatever. I see that you're shipping this commodity. You're saying it's non-going. Looking at the special provisions, it appears that you are using the special provision 37 of the 49 CFR on this, and just want to verify this information. Our employees at all times do due diligence to make sure that our customers and our company is compliant with these goods. And usually I get a thank you back from them saying, no, I appreciate you looking it up or whatever. And, the administrator level really shouldn't be telling somebody they're wrong on shipping hazardous, especially if they're a chemical company, because you know what, more than likely they're right. And some of the regulations actually move over to other codes of federal regulation, like shipping large bulk shipments on ships where it's pumped in or whatever. All those regulations are covered under 46 CFR. So totally different ballgame. So one thing that is helpful for us is to identify under special provisions, if it's special provision 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, That means it's a poison by inhalation hazard, a PIH. This is the most hazardous stuff out there. As you can see, it's even broken down into different 6 subsections. Zone A, you might have to evacuate for a mile in all directions. Now, imagine that in the middle of New York City, evacuating that. New York City probably doesn't allow poison inhalation hazards inside the city areas or whatever. These things are very carefully transported. So, like I said, you're not running into that often. But the different zones tell them how bad it really is. And then 5, they have specific rules on how the poison inhalation is selected, including in the proper shipping name and description. So that's the one thing I tell my people to look at. Special provisions. All you're looking for is the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And like I said, these are very rare. We do a lot of hazardous, probably half of our shipments that we handle. And I would say we handle probably 500 or more hazardous shipments every month. And half of those, for my 38 years, we have done a poison inhalation hazard twice. So they're very rare. Also, I tell my employees that if you ever run across one, I have to approve anything before it goes out. I want to review it just because it's that important that we get this right. IMDG, we're going to talk about the symbols a little bit later in column 1 of the HMT. When you have a generic name like flammable liquid NOS and it needs a technical or further description of the product, they don't have that in IMDG. Hazardous HMT has it in column 1, indicates the G indicates that for generic. But special provision 274 does that. Special provision 354, toxic by inhalation, does that. Because we use IMDG when we're really preparing the ozone, more than likely, we've already done the inland transport to get it to the port. And when you've got an import, you are only arranging for the domestic or rail, truck or rail after it arrives. So you're not really using the IMDG for that. And you've already gone over this in the hazardous material table. So that's where I kind of emphasize the special provisions of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, much easier to spot than say the number 354. And then the technical name. So, but that's how the rest of the world does it. That's one of the things that is a little bit better, I think, in our regulations. So there, column 7 in the hazardous material table, column 6 in the dangerous goods. Quantity limitations and limited and accepted quantities. In the hazardous, there are ways that you can ship goods that are have exceptions. I mean, if it's a small enough amount, you don't have to declare it as dangerous goods. Makes sense. This used to run into a lot of your, what used to be called, if y'all remember, the ORMD, other regulated materials domestic. These are a lot of your consumer products, but pretty much everyone, there's a chance that every commodity and UN number has an exception that you can ship it as a small enough quantity, but it's pretty small. Limited quantities are when you ship a small enough amount that it's still declared as hazardous, but you don't have to do the same marking and placarding that you do. The sad thing for us forwarders and brokers, we still have to prepare the shipping papers the same way, and we have to insert the words limited quantity. So it's a little confusing because, in my mind in the beginning, it was like, well, what's the big deal for sending it limited quantity? Because I've actually got to do more work on the shipping paper. So why? What's the advantage? Well, the advantage is the type packaging, marking, and labeling the customer has to do. And as I talked about, those can be tremendous savings for them. So anybody that they can ship in a limited quantity. Similar, to give you a simple example of like a can of paint. Now you get a 55-gallon drum of paint. yes, it can be hazardous if it's flammable. But if you get 1 gallon of paint, that's a limited quantity. So anything under 5 liters shipped in certain type of packaging of that particular UN number for paint can be shipped as a limited quantity. So something that your customers need, if you do have limited quantity shipments, I highly suggest, and you need to write this down because I don't even think that I have this in the book, I mean, on the presentation, which I really should. But the IMDG gives a great explanation of limited quantities and what needs to be done. And that's in chapter 3.4. So it's kind of like right after the table, but it's in 3.4 of the IMDG. So if you are doing limited quantities, kind of bookmark this, write a little note on there, 3.4 IMDG, and just read that section. It's 3 pages long. The IMDG, what's nice about it is it's written in kind of universally accepted English, whereas the 49 CFR is written in US government garbage that can be very technical. The IMDG is a really easy way to understand something. So that's a general suggestion for anything that you're working on with, I'm trying to learn a little bit more of this. You might want to start with the IMDG, even though you might be moving it domestic, because it just reads a little bit easier and understandable, where the 49 CFR, especially if you're a custom broker, you certainly understand that. It is written like the 19 CFR, that you're just looking for the answer, but they're giving you the except in case, 19.3.8.D4 or 19.6. And they're giving you all these things to take you off on. And after you go look that up, you come back to where you were, or you forget even where you were and why you're even asking the question, because you just get into this whole rabbit hole. So IMDG, little piece of advice there. So column 8A up here on the hazardous material are exceptions. And sorry, I'm looking at this. And what they'll do is what they show you here is for the limited quantities. You see up here where it says packaging 173. Well, whatever number is in there, that means that the what am I trying to say? Oops, sorry. So that's where you go into the regulations. So if you're looking up exceptions or limited quantities for any of these, you just go to 173. The exceptions will be listed here if there are any. We've got some examples coming up that'll explain this a little bit better. Then it gives you column is quantity limitations, but look at these. They're only for passenger rail or passenger aircraft or cargo. So this is basically just for domestic air and rail. So it's basically telling you what kind of quantities can you put onto something that has passengers on it. And like I said, rail, we don't really transport rail by Amtrak. But for air, if you're doing domestic air shipments, it is important to look at these. On the dangerous goods, they're a little bit more clear under column 7. It has one for limited quantities that will tell you exactly what the amount is. You can ship any less than that amount, and it can be a limited quantity. Those are usually listed in liters, half a liters, 5 liters, things like that. So nice little, for your customer. Again, you're not having to determine any of this. This is just to give you some further information that your customer is dealing with. Because when I usually tell people too, for these tables, you should never really go past column 7 here or column 6 here. That's all the information that we're looking at to do our shipping papers. There's some other information that kind of helps us a little bit with some things, but it's just really those first 6 columns here, those 7 columns here. That's the core of what we're looking at. And I always tell our people when we start, I'll show them the book and they're like, okay, and their like eyes kind of swell, have that dizzy look in their eyes of like, this is a lot of information and codes I'm going to have to learn. I always put a piece of paper over everything past that column, 6 or 7, depends which one. I said, this is all you need to learn to really be able to do your job. This is stuff you might look up later for whatever reason, but this is really what you need to know. And it really does kind of cut down a little of that fear in the beginning of having something so overwhelming you can't do it. So column 7B are accepted quantities. So this means that they can be shipped without declaring as dangerous goods. So there's going to get an E0 all the way up to an E5. So let's look at those, though, to see what they really mean. The maximum net quantity per inner packaging in grams for solid or milliliters for liquids and gases. So the maximum of an EO, you can't ship any of that. So that's the bad stuff. It's probably going to be the packing group 1 stuff, of course, the inhalation hazards, things like that. You can't ship that without declaring it. But the best you can do is an E1, 2, or 3. And then an E4 or 5 is just 1. This is in grams. 30 grams is equal to about 1 ounce. How I know that, I don't know. Something traces back to about 40 years ago when I knew how many grams were in an ounce, but I won't tell you what that was for. So 30 grams, 1 ounce, you're talking about a very, very small. And then think of 1 gram. I mean, how do you almost even measure 1 gram if you're actually shipping it in a single package? That's a tiny, tiny little package. So, and then the maximum outer packaging, gets a little bit higher or whatever that, but if you can't cover this, you certainly can't cover that. So just kind of interesting to see where your customers are like, they're shipping these goods. More than likely, when they're shipping something that's hazardous as an accepted quantity, they're not going to describe it as the proper shipping name. They're going to describe it as something more generic because it would be stopped by everybody if they were shipping it there. But it is possible that there could be 1 ounce samples, things like that for that go out to somebody that wants to test something. I mean, think about it. I mean, 1 ounce of paint can be like a little paint swatch stuff that someone does as a tester type of thing. So some of the paint touch-up kits, things like that could be shown as accepted because, think about it, how hazardous is a little tiny vial of that. So, okay. Vessel stowage, we went over this and we determined that we didn't need to know anything about this, so we can skip this. The only thing I kind of wanted just to show you here is you see the ISA tanks loaded on the ship, on the end of the ship. A lot of hazardous goods are actually loaded on the edge of the ships. Very heavy cargo and hazardous cargo, which hazardous cargo is heavy a lot of times, because if something happens and they need to jettison, they want to dump those things in the ocean before it destroys the whole ship and all the cargo on the ship. I know that sounds horrible environmentally, but the ocean is a tremendous, vast part of water that, stuff like this is negligible when it goes in the ocean. I say that, I'll probably get emails on that. But it also shows you here's something that a fire started on a ship, and I believe this is one that was determined that somehow some fireworks explosives went off or something and started a fire on the ship, and that's why they would rather jettison that than instead of rolling all of that cargo. So I talked about it and referred to symbols on the table, and this is in the first column of the hazardous material table in the 49 CFR. There is nothing like this in the IMDG. This is definitely an American type thing. And there's a lot of codes in there of whether that UN number applies only to air shipments or domestic shipments or international or water or things like that. Those don't come up a lot. The letter G does come up a lot, and it stands for generic, but those are all those NOS materials and generic proper shipping names like corrosive liquids NOS, flammable liquids NOS, every one of them has pretty much has an NOS. And the reason for that a lot of flammable liquids, they kind of have the same components, and they kind of, how you would react to them, things like that are the same. We couldn't have a UN number for every individual commodity out there. There would be millions of UN numbers. So they group together as many as possible that fall under the same characteristic. So you need an additional description or technical name. The real thing is what is the chemical in there that made it flammable or corrosive? There can be more than one. At least two always have to be listed if you have two or more. And we'll talk about this a little bit more on the shipping. That's where that G comes from. And this is very useful here. If you remember on the IMDG, under special provisions, it would be under 274 or 354, one of those two. I always mix them up or whatever. For some things, because like I said, I use the 49 CFR for that. 274 under IMDG. Oh, I said that right down here. So we'll get to that when we go into the shipping papers, because that's some of the additional information that needs to be on there. The plus sign, it fixes the proper shipping name, class, and group. So if the material is known to be pose a risk to humans, so if there's certain mixtures or changes or whatever, it's like you can't change the shipping name. So if you put it in a mixture, it's still going to be that proper shipping name. I've never had one of these, so I'm not familiar with ever having a plus sign in front of it. So again, very rare that you come across any of these. Okay, in column number 15 of the IMDG, it's got some more information, information that could be helpful. So some of y'all that do ocean export shipments, I'm talking to y'all, the EMS is the emergency schedule for fire and spillage on board vessels. And really, there's a guide out there. I looked it up once. It was kind of interesting. But this is those, some steamship lines want these on the documents. The EMS is not mandatory, but may be required for some by some steamship lines. And here's my little point on that is sometimes if you're a compliance person and you are going by the regulations, there are certain times to fight for things and there's certain times not to fight for things and just to do it. So if you've got a steamship line saying, I need the EMS numbers, and it'll be like the F-A, S-D, or whatever that tells for fire and spillage on how they react. You know, if you're going to be the type that says, you know, the regulations don't say that I have to have it on it. Well, it's like, well, we need on it. Well, show me on the regulations I have to do it. The steamship line nowadays are just going to go, that's fine, then we don't accept your shipment. Come get the container. We will charge you for the container for you taking it out and the time that you possessed it. But this is our policy and our procedure, and just follow it. If they're not going against the regulations, steamship line say comes to you and says, okay, on your description, you have the UN number, proper shipping name, class, and packing group, and then the net quantity, and then the flash point. You have it all on one line. We only want the basic description on the first line, and you have to put all the other information on the second line. Immediate response, the regulations don't say that. I don't have to do that. Then they can say, well, then take your business elsewhere. So those things are not worth fighting over anymore. They used to be fun to fight over, but I don't know about you, but there's no time to fight with steamship lines, and they don't listen, and you never win. So I've given up on that fight. So kind of give in. EMS, they're in that column, easy to find, easy to put on your documents. Some of your customers send it with their information, others don't, but pretty simple. You don't, like I said, you don't have to put it on it, but if you know certain steamship lines require it or prefer it or ask for it, then put it on there. And you may not see it on the dangerous goods declaration from your customer because that was initially, it's multimodal and they initially prepared it for a domestic move. So they may not have been thinking that it's something they could have put on. The last column on the dangerous goods list is where my nerdiness again comes in a little bit. It's called properties and observation. And it just describes the goods just to better identify it. It could be like, it's a colorless powder or a white powder, or, it's with very strong odor, things like that. Just kind of interesting. And they give like little points about it and things about it. I read them. I'm probably the only one in the United States that ever reads them, because they're really not good for anything for you to do. Just gives you more information. So just something that if you want to know more about your products that you're shipping, but if you don't and you don't care, I don't know why you're here. I'm kidding. Okay, we are done. Woohoo! So we are done with this section. Excellent job, everybody. These are gonna be posted. Of course, don't need to tell you all that, but I am gonna send out some more information on what we are kind of gearing up to next week on doing some exercises, doing a little bit more work one-on-one with some things on these calls. I will say we've got 62 people now in the who's taking the class. We had a few join us. Welcome, y'all that joined us. So I really do want to get some feedback on maybe some things that you don't quite understand that you do with your job, or you want some further explanation. I think that would help everybody. If you want to put on a comment, God, Pat, can you please tell me some more horrible stories? I'll be glad to do that. I've got a lot of those. For now, we are going on to packaging, labeling, and marking, or packaging, marking, and labeling next. This, again, is something that's not real specific to what we do, but it's a great overall learning of when you get calls from the truck lines or the steamship lines on something that doesn't match on there, just a better idea of what's going on and being able to visualize your customer's product. So with that, I'm going to go actually have something to eat, and it was a great day, and